Hello and welcome to Cooking with Food Storage. I'm Rebecca from StockingMyPantry.com. In today's episode, we are making cheesy scalloped potatoes with Spam. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first I'd like to go over a list of ingredients. I have a quart of potatoes and it is filled to the brim. So if you look here, you can see it's way to the top. So it's roughly 4 cups of potatoes. I have a third of a cup of powdered milk, a fourth of a cup of dried onions, a 16-ounce can of Ragu double cheddar cheese, and a 12-ounce can of Great Value luncheon meat. I also have 4 cups of hot water. Okay, I'm going to start off by putting the dehydrated potatoes into this bowl, and I'm going to cover them with 4 cups of hot water. And if you hear that noise in the background, that is I'm heating up a cast iron skillet on my induction stovetop, and that tends to be a little noisy. Okay, so I've covered it with water. And now I'm going to just put a bowl on top of a plate on top of the bowl to hold the heat in. I want to let the potatoes rehydrate for about 20 minutes. Okay, while the potatoes are rehydrating, I'm going to cut up and cook my Spam. So, and by the way, this is Great Value luncheon meat. I don't remember if I mentioned that first, but it's the same thing as name brand Spam. So whatever brand you want to use or that you have on hand will work. Okay, you see it has all this gel stuff on it. I'm not going to worry about removing that, but I'm going to cut it into some cubes and fry it up. And the reason is just because I think it tastes better. It's already cooked, but I think the taste is better if you fry it. So that's what I'm going to do. Just cutting it into cubes here. I think this is actually going to be more than enough meat with this dish. And by the way, you could leave the meat out if you prefer a vegetarian version. It'll work fine without the meat. Okay, so now I'm going to fry it up. I've got a heated cast iron skillet. It probably has enough fat, but just in case, I'm going to just use some nonstick spray on, and I'm just going to toss it on here and work on getting it all fried up. I am glad that I used the nonstick spray because in spite of the fact that this must have a fair amount of fat in it, it's not a ton of fat's not coming out of it, and so it's possible it would stick if I hadn't used the nonstick spray. While this is cooking, I just want to talk about what I'm going to do with these other ingredients here. I'm going to add the Ragu cheese sauce to a bowl, as well as the dehydrated onions and the powdered milk. And my thinking on this is that I have enough powder here for a cup of milk. Basically, it's 1/3 cup of non-fat dry powder to 1 cup of milk. And I don't really know how much I'm going to need because I want the sauce to be a little bit thin, but not too thin. So I'm just going to kind of play it by ear, but I figure if I use a little bit more milk powder than I need, then that'll only make it taste a little bit richer. So that'll be totally fine either way. Okay, so I feel like the Spam is browned well enough, and I'm going to start mixing up the other ingredients into this bowl. I'm going to put the entire jar of this cheese sauce. Okay, it's relatively thin already, so I'm probably not going to want to thin it too terribly much. And so probably technically the powdered milk wouldn't be needed, but I'd rather err on the side of using it and not needing it than wishing I had a richer flavor. So I'm just going to put the powdered milk in. I'm going to put the dehydrated onions in and stir it up. And obviously the powdered milk and the onions are going to absorb some of the moisture. And I think I'm going to put just about I'll start off with just a quarter of a cup of water and stir that into that. Just so I get as much cheese out of this jar as I can, I'm going to just put the water in there, and I'm putting the lid back on, and I'm just going to shake it. Okay. I wanted to show you the potatoes. They are not completely rehydrated, but you can see that they're floppy now. And so I'm going to let them sit for a few more minutes. I actually lost track of time, so I can't tell you exactly how long they've been sitting. But I'm going to let them sit a few more minutes until they're more supple. And again, they're going to continue rehydrating some, especially since I have a little extra water in the cheese sauce. But I'm going to let them sit for about 5 more minutes. Okay, it's just a couple more minutes till I'm going to start putting the whole thing together. So I thought while I'm waiting, I'll go ahead and I'm going to spoon just a very thin layer of the cheese and onion mixture on the bottom of this pie pan. I want most of the cheesy goodness to go over the top, but it won't hurt to have some on the bottom as well. And then the potatoes, I'm going to put the potatoes on, and the Spam, and then cover with cheese. So that's basically what I'm doing there. Okay, now I'm going to drain the water off the potatoes, and I am not worrying about getting all the water off, because a little bit still on will just kind of help the ongoing rehydration process. And again, these are looking pretty darn good already. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the potatoes and put them on top of the cheese. By the way, if you don't know how to dehydrate potatoes, I do have a video where I show how to dehydrate these potato slices, and so you can refer to that. And I'll leave a link to that in the description. Okay, let's go ahead and put the Spam in. I think that this amount of Spam would actually work. It's plenty for a bigger amount. So, like, let's say if you were going to make a 9 by 13 pan, you could start off with, say, 6 cups of the potatoes. And I think that would, this amount of Spam would be plenty for that. So, and again, leave out the Spam if you want it to be vegetarian. I considered putting in some dehydrated broccoli too and making this kind of like a one-pot meal, but then decided that for this time I would just make it as simple as possible. Okay, and now we're going to cover with the rest of the cheese sauce and the onions that I've got in there. Remember, I decided to put the onions in the sauce so they could start rehydrating inside of the sauce. By the way, if I wasn't making this completely from food storage, rather than using this jarred sauce, I would probably make a white, add cheese to it, make a cheese sauce that way. And I will leave a recipe for that in the blog post that I will link to, so that if you wanted to make it from, like, let's say that you had the dehydrated potatoes and you wanted to just use regular cheese because you had some on hand, then I'll give you the recipe for that. And so be sure to check out the description for that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with foil, and I'm going to put it in a 350-degree oven that I already have preheating, and bake it for about a half an hour, and then I will check it. Now normally when I do scalloped potatoes, after the first half hour, I take the foil off and then I let it brown a little bit. Having not used this type of cheese sauce before, I'm not sure if it will brown like cheese normally would brown, but I might just kind of experiment with that a little bit and see what happens. So I'll let you know. Okay, let's get it covered with foil, and then we'll pop it in the oven. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Okay, it's been in the oven for 30 minutes, and I just took it out. I want to check and see what it's looking like. Ooh, it's looking actually pretty nice. And remember I said that I didn't know if it would brown with this cheese sauce, but it's obviously getting some browning. It has a good amount of liquid in it. And what I wanted to see is I wanted to see how saucy it was, and I also wanted to test the potatoes and see if they're done, if they taste done. So I'm going to take one taste. Okay, this is what it looks like after it's been in the oven uncovered for 10 minutes. You can see that around the edges it's brown. If you wanted it more brown, you could probably leave it another 5 minutes. One thing I'm liking is you can see like the pieces of onion, because I had some pretty large pieces of onion when I dehydrated them. So I think that's going to add a lot to it. It's definitely adding a lot to the smell of it. So I'm going to go ahead and dish some up and then give it a taste test, and I'll let you know what I think and if I would make any changes in it in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and dish some up here and make sure that there is some Spam in and potatoes, obviously. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, let's see what it tastes like. So I've got the plate of it here, and the potatoes are nice and tender. So I think that definitely worked to, even though they weren't completely 100% rehydrated when I put them in, they finished rehydrating in the cheese sauce. Take a taste that has some Spam in it. Okay, I would say that this is worthwhile. The cheese tastes similar to like a Velveeta type of cheese. So if you're real used to, like I am, I'm used to making everything from scratch. I would prefer it if I made the cheese sauce from scratch, but with this being something that's completely 100% made from pantry goods that are shelf stable, no refrigeration needed, I think it's worthwhile. One thing that I would do a little bit differently is I would have put some black pepper in it. I forgot that, and I think a little bit of black pepper to taste would kind of help counterbalance some of the saltiness of it. It definitely is on the high sodium side. If you can get a lower salt Spam luncheon meat type of thing, then I would recommend doing that, especially if you're watching your salt intake. Let's see, in terms of other things that I would maybe do differently is you could definitely, if you didn't want it as salty, you could also up the potatoes to about 6 cups of potatoes and still just use the 1 can of Spam and the 1 jar of the cheese sauce. and maybe water that sauce down a little bit so that it would just not be overly thick with the extra potatoes. So for example, instead of using just 1/4 cup of water, I would maybe do a 1/2 cup or 3/4 cup, and then use the 6 cups of the dehydrated potatoes that you've rehydrated. So I hope that this was helpful. I definitely do plan to buy the ingredients to make this again, because it's a nice, well, actually I'll wait and I'll put up on the video whether or not I'll make it again. It kind of depends on how my family feels about it. So I'll let you know that. I'm going to go ahead and serve them now. I hope that you found this helpful. And if you did, I would appreciate it if you would like this video and if you would also subscribe to my channel. And don't forget that I have detailed instructions about how to make cheese sauce from scratch, which I think that if you have cheese on hand, that's a better way to go. It's healthier and in my opinion, it's tastier, but this was definitely good for shelf-stable items. So be sure to check out the link in the description for the blog post where I break all of this down for you and also give you other options for the cheese sauce. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.